Welcome to Digital Dominators, the podcast that helps small business owners grow their confidence, sharpen their digital skills, and actually enjoy showing up online. I'm Sooz Young, your host, tech coach, and digital cheerleader, and every week I chat with brilliant experts to bring you practical tips, smart strategies, and the tools and tech to make business easier. From social media marketing to websites, content to confidence, AI to automation, we're breaking it down into simple steps you can actually use. If you're ready to make things simpler and more successful in your digital world, you're in the right place. Let's get stuck in. Welcome back to Digital Dominators, the podcast where we explore the digital skills, systems, and strategic thinking that help you grow, adapt, and lead in an ever-evolving world. Today's episode is a powerful deep dive into one of the biggest shifts we're seeing in modern business: AI entering the workforce. But this isn't just a tech trend, it's a transformation. And understanding how to navigate it requires more than just plugging in new tools. It requires new thinking, new leadership, and new systems that blend technology with humanity. Joining me today are two industry leaders who are helping organisations do just that. Kevin Stewart is a design and products leader with a background in complex transformation projects across industries like healthcare, mobility, and finance. Through his consultancy, Owendale Advisory, he works with executive teams to help them redesign how work gets done in the age of AI and automation. Gary Crawford is a strategy and innovation consultant with deep experience leading product, tech, and leadership teams through business model transformation and digital disruption. His work sits at the intersection of emerging technology and organisational design, helping companies rethink how they operate, grow, and compete. Together, Kevin and Gary are helping shape a version of the future where AI is a collaborator, a catalyst, and a co-pilot for business growth. In this episode, we're unpacking what AI means for teams, leadership, and the future of work, how to adopt it without losing your culture or clarity, and why the real challenge isn't technical, it's transformational. So let's get into it. Hello, Kevin and Gary. Hello, how are you both today?
Hey,
Hello.
Sooz, good to see you.
I'm just going to put a caveat out there. I'm not used to interviewing two people at the same time. So this is going to be an interesting listen for us all as we navigate the three of us conversing. But it's going to be fun because these guys have got such great experience that I'm so excited to share it with you on the podcast. But for all the listeners, you know how we start our podcast. It is an introduction with our guests in their own words to tell us their journey, how they got to where they are, especially with Owendale. And I'm going to throw it out there. Who wants to start? Kevin or Gary? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Go for it, Kev.
I was hoping to do the same to you. Yeah,
It's just that wee bit faster. Yeah.
as Sue said, I come from a design and product background. So I started my career fairly early on. Like I was 13, 14, like just writing out to different design agencies and asking if I could come intern with them. A lot of them actually let me do it, which is really cool. So I kind of just like moved around all the different, like from branding to a bit of industrial design, into the UX wasn't really a thing then. So it was like early web design and stuff. And I just did that every year, like through my school years, I suppose, just over the summer. So found there that went to university, studied design, came out, got a job in branding, lasted 6 months because I hated it. It was far too subjective. Really loved the data-driven aspect of UX design. And UX, this was sort of 2011, give or take. So like responsive web was coming, UX was getting much more serious. And that sort of pairing of sort of data, almost of science and art, a little bit of the creative process with data, was really appealing. So I moved much more into a UX field. From UX, moved into product, from product into more product strategy, and then from a general, more wider strategy space. Throughout the career, sort of agency side, consultancy side, mostly here, there, and everywhere. But for the latter part of my career, I was the head of department for one of the sort of larger consultancies in the UK, for the head of design, and which is actually where I met Gary. I'll leave that for later in the show. But yeah, over the time, worked with a range of different businesses on sort of transformational projects of thinking of how we take a sort of integrated approach across sort of product and tech. And usually, I suppose the one that we'll probably come on to later, anytime I've seen a transformation go wrong, it always goes wrong for the same reason. People, the tech, the product, they're easy, they're simple, they're largely predictable. People aren't, and they're always the bit that made it really complex. And I suppose from that angle, that's when artificial intelligence got made cool again by Sam Altman. Like when we started experimenting, like how does this change not only how we do our jobs, but fundamentally what our jobs are, what technology and product means in a world. It was that sort of human focus that I found wasn't really being focused in on. It was being treated like a technology challenge. And sort of me and Gary, we kept saying to each other, this isn't a tech challenge, this is a people and a design challenge. And we need to think of it that way. I'm now aware that you asked me to introduce myself. I've went way off topic. So before I do that, over to Gary to do the same.
Can you understand why I do that? Because it just starts the conversation, doesn't it? It just flows so much easier. I mean, we'll break it apart once we've heard Gary's intro as well, because there'll be crossover there that we can then start getting into the nitty-gritty of the episode. Gary, tell us about you.
Hi, great to see you again, Sooz. So yeah, I've got a very, very broad background. I started running businesses in my teenage years. I had a handyman business, I had a tennis coaching business. I ran nightclubs for a while. I had my own agency for a while. So I've always been focused and rooted everything that I've done in the business strategy side of things and understanding how businesses operate. It was as I'd left university and got into running nightclubs after a while, I started to realize, as much fun as that was, I wasn't going to be able to keep doing that until I was middle-aged like I am today. So I went back and went down a much more technical route at that point and got really into development and restudied at university. Then got a great start in a few digital pure plays and the medical and healthcare environments, bioinformatics, some in finance. Was lucky enough then to get a step into the consultancy world with some exceptional companies like ThoughtWorks, where we worked on kind of large-scale global transformations. We moved abroad for a few years with ATQA to help set up their Scandinavian presence. Came back in a hurry at the beginning of COVID. But by that time, what I found was I'd combined or supplemented my kind of business strategy side of things with some deep technology knowledge, but then also with some experiential knowledge. And that really is where my interests are. When you bring together business strategy, technology, and experience design, that's when the really magic things happen. And, as Kev said, we ended up coming together in a UK-based consultancy. And, as I say, I've worked consultancy for years. But if I'm honest, and this might be a more controversial point, I think consultancy businesses these days are in somewhat of a crisis point. I think the way the market is, the way the economics are, a lot of the big trends that are happening, there's a lot of downward pressure on these types of organizations. And I've always been lucky to work for organizations where the financial success of the consultancy is a byproduct of doing the right thing for the customer. And as I saw the industry shift, and Kevin and I spoke a huge amount about this, we really felt that AI coming to the forefront now, it's the biggest shift since the Industrial Revolution, right at the point where organizations can't depend upon their incumbent consultancy to support. And that's really ideal for One Day came about. How do we bring together the very best strategic boutique support for senior leaders to help them make sense of the biggest shift since the Industrial Revolution? And here we are today with One.
Thank you both for sharing such your vast experience. I know that this conversation is going to be really exciting, not just for me, but for the people that are listening, that are curious about helping to support their teams, helping to support the environment that they're working in, or even thinking about that starting stage of setting up their own MVP in their own business. Is this going to be the right solution? Is this going to work for our customers? Are we coming with the future in mind, not just where we're currently at the moment? So lots that we can get into from what you both shared. But I just want to ask this question to start off with. What are the current challenges that you are seeing with businesses when they're starting to look at using AI as either a solution to get it because it's a hot topic, right? So everybody wants to implement AI. Is it just creating an AI solution because they've got the money to do it? Or is it actually solving a problem? What are you seeing consultancies when they're coming in talking to you about it?
Do you want to go first?
This is the second time you've done that.
I know, he started the...
So I think there's a host of things that come up. I'm trying to think of the big familiar trends. I think I touched on it lightly during the introduction. I think one of the big challenges that we see is it looks like tech, it sounds like tech, so it's treated as tech. So often it's given to the CTO to deal with within the enterprise or within the company. And that sounds sensible, especially to someone who's non-technical. And what I've seen anyway there is you almost get this vertical application off it down the tech line of the business. Now that makes sense if it was tech, but it's not really. It's wider than tech. It's a general technology. I usually find that you need to take a much more holistic approach, and it needs to almost sit horizontally across the business, so horizontally across the leadership group, because you have a lot of different concerns in there. It's like, yes, how you do it from a technological point of view, what LLM you're going to put in, how's that going to integrate with your tech stack, how are you going to expose your different sources and integrations and data to it? That is a question that needs to be answered, but it's one of many. There's a lot of things around, people are scared of AI. How are you going to work on adoption for that? How are you going to get your staff to adopt it? How are your people team is going to interact with this? How are you going to do training? All of these things. Where are you actually going to use it that's going to be meaningful as well? How are you going to calculate the cost to it? And then some of the other things you need to start thinking about is like, really need, actually, there's a good question in there. One of the questions I've been playing with a lot recently is when you think about agentics, and I'm sure we'll get on to agents soon, is an agent a product or a service? Because depending on the answer to that massively depends what you start to do with it. And for example, I tend to lean to it's much closer to a service when you know it's something that performs a task for you. That is almost definition of a service. And if you think historically, all services are largely done by employees. You deploy a human to do that. So if you take that sort of example and run with it in a business context, if you're using agents to do services within your business, they're much closer to thinking of them as an employee than they are thinking of them as a product. And that starts to shift, because when you start thinking about how you do that, that moves you away from product design. That actually moves you into organizational and service design much more. So you start getting into these interesting things of not only how do you have these different lenses for the current setup of the business, but how does the actual org chart and the business model, operating model have to evolve like in both directions, because those new services, those new digital employees are coming in. I think that's one of the biggest challenges we see, and trying to get that across is hard to do. The other big one is people think it's just a chatbot. That one comes up a lot, but it's much less interesting. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of other ones, but I should pass to Gary as well for his take.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Kev said. I think building on your last point there, Kev, about it's more than a chatbot, but that's possibly not interesting. I actually think there's something really interesting in there. I think there's a massive sense of false security that's developing around AI within organizations. And to some extent, that's sometimes peddled by the sales engines of some of the big SaaS providers. But if you've got Copilot, you've done the AI tick. If you've used ChatGPT, you've done the AI tick. And really, that's a massive simplification. Even if we didn't have any more breakthroughs in AI ever, we've still got way more AI capability than we'd know what to do with for the next 20, 30 years within our organization. And the way I like to think about that or frame that is, if you think about the internet, you go way back to, say, 1998. And you can do this if anyone's listening and you want to jump into the internet Wayback Machine, jump onto McDonald's website in 1998, and you'll see this very red with splashes of yellow brochureware website. It doesn't do anything. It tells you that McDonald's exists as an entity, but it really doesn't go far beyond that. It's a bit of brochureware. Now, if you think about where we are today with the internet, we're in a very, very different world. So how did we go from brochureware to the world that we live in today, where even our washing machines, and maybe this shouldn't be, maybe even our washing machines are internet connected? Well, back in 1998 with that brochureware, I like to refer to that as a point solution. It's a very simple solution. You could, unplug one piece of marketing and plug it in somewhere else, or, it's a really, really simple thing. It doesn't really deeply integrate with the business. It doesn't bring a huge amount more capability. It doesn't shift the needle in any key business metrics. But nonetheless, it's an interesting foray into the world of the internet. You fast forward perhaps 10 years from that, and suddenly you've got Amazon springing to life, and you've got e-commerce as a thing, which goes well beyond that concept of brochureware. Suddenly now retail has got an entire new channel. It doesn't replace retail fundamentally, but it becomes a very important channel and a very important growth surface for any retail-based organization. You come on a few years past that again, and suddenly you start to get the introduction of businesses like Spotify or Netflix, where the business model is fundamentally tied to the internet. You couldn't have those businesses without the internet. We've reimagined how you exchange files. They've got this 24-hour access. You've got unlimited availability and a complete shift in the marginal cost of producing a new record or a new film. That's a completely different end. So that brochureware is a point solution. E-commerce is closer to what we call an application solution. When you go all the way to completely reimagining the business model, at that point, it's starting to get into what we call a system solution. It reimagines the entire system. And to bring this back to the AI today, the majority of organizations out there are still stuck in the point solution piece, but they feel like they've done it because they've got a big bill that comes in from Microsoft or OpenAI or some of these businesses on an ongoing basis. And, if you're listening to this and you're in any doubt, ask yourself, how many discussions have you had in your organization about who owns Clippy in the corner of your website? Or, when you're going to roll out the next set of licenses for Microsoft Copilot, we need to shift beyond that point-based solution into application solutions and into system solutions to really get the richness and the depth and the full capability of AI transforming our businesses in the way that the internet has for many today.
I think there's a parallel point to make to that as well. Exactly to your question, Suze, what sort of challenges usually come up? I would say in the last 6 months, there's been very close to what Gary just said. I had to think about. There's the MIT report that had the failure rate of like 95% came out. I think that became one of the common sort of sound clips or sound bites that kind of got refused around, that these are actually failing. And I think that's kind of interesting to touch on a little bit, because one, the rate in which they fail, it's like most new technologies have a very high failure rate when they first come out. To start with, it's actually not that far when you do the baseline. But when you start thinking around that system level change as well, I think that's one of the issues with it as well. Like, you're getting these high fail rates. People aren't necessarily thinking about it on the system one. They're going and finding those little point solutions that a lot of the time no one necessarily asked for, and they're not being used. They're not having a clear value to it either. I suppose that's part of that AI fatigue is coming. The other side of that, and this is probably the more relevant bit to Gary as well, you've got that failure rate that keeps getting mentioned. You've got the AI bubble that keeps getting mentioned, that we're in a bubble. We probably are. And the bubble's going to burst at some point. Probably true. I think to draw back to the point that Gary had made about the internet era, there was a dot-com bubble and the dot-com burst. If you actually look on a timeline of that, all of those point solutions, not all of those point solutions, a huge amount of those point solutions came pre-bubble burst. Those sort of brochure wares where you've swapped in a physical printed brochure for a digital brochure. You didn't actually see those systemic changes like your Ubers and Airbnbs who rewrote the entire operating model of their business until post the burst. And I suppose that's one of the things that you get about a sort of AI skepticism just now of what's in a bubble, it's going to burst. Is like, yeah, probably will, because there is a lot of hype and there's a lot of misunderstanding on it. I would wager we'll see a lot of the meaningful integration and the meaningful innovation after that burst as well. So I suppose there's a message I find myself saying a lot. It's like, for the businesses who are looking to integrate it, it doesn't really matter if we're in a burst or not. Sure, investors, completely different story, but we'll avoid that one.
I love how what is the underpinning part of all of this is that it's the integration with humans that is driven by the systems process that you both touched on as well. And I think what we forget whenever we're trying to create a solution is that at both sides of both the company side and the user side, that it's a human at the heart of it. So no matter what technology tool that we're going to implement, whether that be AI or any sort of tool, it is remembering what the human is. And a process comes from the human, right? It's the human design as part of it. So I give a really basic analogy of this, of like when somebody needs something done, but then it's only Joan in accounts that can do that, and she doesn't work on a Tuesday. And so the business is screwed because that one person has that one process.
Yeah.
So how do we translate that one person's process into an AI process that then an agent can take over that process, whether or not Joan is in or not? Now that might replace Joan and what she's doing, but that opens Joan up to coming up with new processes that will work better with the rest of the business and how that works, because Joan is a process person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, entirely. Yeah, I love that analogy. So I think that hits the nail on the head. And one of the things we've been speaking extensively about for probably the best part of 2, possibly even 3 years now, is the whole idea of a silicon employee. And what does it mean for us meatbags to be working with and collaborating with all day long these silicon employees? And actually, the process of doing that, going back to Joan, it's a very tricky thing. People think they can spin up an agent, throw it into a team, and everything's going to be wonderful and scalable and reduce costs and all these kind of things. But it's simply not as simple as that. You know, I think the kind of parallel that I would give to that is in any well-formed organization, if you've got a team that's a high-performing team of any kind, whether it's Joan and her teammates or whoever it is, you would think really, really carefully. You'd probably discuss with HR and you discuss with a line manager or whoever, whether or not to add a new person into that team and whether or not that new person would really, truly add to the capacity and the capability of the team, bring some new skills, or whether actually it would break the culture and actually reset the team quite a lot.
Yeah.
It is absolutely no different. And if anything, I'd argue possibly even worse when you think about the integration of a silicon peer into that team. Because again, whether you subscribe to the whole storm and Norman performing ethos, or whether you're just thinking about culture, or even very simple things like if you were asked, Suze, tomorrow to collaborate with an AI, but if you were in an organization and you know your line manager said you're not collaborating with Joan.ai all day, every day, you would be really quite upset if you find that you were missing your goals and your targets and your objectives because the AI was making a mess of it. Equally, the organization would probably be quite perturbed if suddenly you were smashing those targets and taking home incredible big bonuses when actually it was the AI that was doing that. So everything from collaboration and reward systems and communication systems and how you onboard and how you offboard, all the way through to how do you determine what things can safely and responsibly and sympathetically be done with an agent versus what should be a human and AI collaborating, through to what things simply should just be human all the time because it's differentiating or it's part of a core kind of governance or auditing process. Or these things have to be really surgically mapped out and understood and carefully handled throughout that journey. It's not as simple as just throw in an agent.
As a creator, I used to spend hours re-recording voiceovers to get the perfect tone. But finding reliable voice talent, booking studio time, and editing takes forever, and it can break the bank. That's why I recommend 11 Labs. It generates ultra-realistic AI voices and even clones your own, all in seconds. With natural-sounding speech, multilingual support, and seamless text-to-speech conversion, 11 Labs powers podcasts, audiobooks, training modules, and more. No mic required. Ready to level up your audio? Try it free today at allmylink.me/TC11labs and bring your scripts to life with 11 Labs.
Yeah. I think to add to that a little, I think risk and ethics becomes a big part of every AI conversation, as it rightly should. And there's so many different angles you can take onto that conversation, from environmental impact, from sort of ethical impact. In Joan's case, of Joan may not have a job, you would certainly have the ethical one. I think businesses, there is more ethical approaches they can take, and obviously they should. I think one of the risky bits that rarely gets talked about, or what for me one of the biggest key risks for AI that doesn't get focused in that discussion as much as it should do, is actually the decision of where shouldn't AI touch as well. And for me, that's one of the biggest risks actually, is what should stay human. Because in Joan's example, and I know we didn't go deep into it, Joan does have an advantage. I take what you're saying, she's not there on a Tuesday, that's problematic. But Joan has an autonomy advantage over an agent for now, where if people aren't following her process, she can go hunt them down and bash them over the head, metaphorically. AI
Not literally, no.
Yeah, well, I'm not advocating for
Throw ones and zeros at them.
So I think that's one of those things when we talk about it, not from a technological, but a human, a processes, an organizational thing, is like there are right places for AI to be introduced both internally and externally. And things like that embodiment and that autonomy value is a major one where you have to think of, do we need this to be proactive and be able to leave whatever system it's in and wander to the next part of the office? And yeah, I'm not sure that comes up enough during the risk bit of where shouldn't be AI and how we factor that in. We were doing a bit of work, was it yesterday, I think, with one of our colleagues, Steph, and she found a fantastic video of people like hacking the Taco Bell artificial intelligence order taking system. And it was like someone uploaded a great clip of like when they drive up to it, because they don't want to deal with the AI thing. They just ask for like, can I have 17,000 paper cups, please? And immediately you get a human. I think that's a brilliant lightning rod for, there's places it should stay human, at least for now.
Yeah.
And being able to think about that in a risk place is something that we're under indexing for, I think.
Yeah, and this is something, that with I know Dale, we're focused on all the time. We're really lucky. The majority of our clients are quite serious clients. They're perhaps working on healthcare, national infrastructure, governmental policy, so they're quite serious clients. And that gives us a really nice lens that whenever we're talking about where could a silicon employee perhaps amplify or shift the needle somewhere, we always start by mapping out the full value chain for the process and the department within the organization where we're making these considerations. Because from our perspective, you never ever start with AI. You don't start with the technology. You start
Yeah.
by understanding what is your business strategy, what you're trying to achieve, how do you compete, how do you create value, what are your services, your products, how do you serve, how do you bring on board and enable and support your employees within the organization, and then start to map out the processes from end to end, all the way from right down with your supplier base, all the way through to that value being created and in the hands of a customer or a regulator or whoever your kind of target audience is. And by doing that, you're able to then surgically start identifying where the cognitive bottlenecks, the human bottlenecks are within those processes. You suddenly start seeing things that we've become blind to for decades or potentially even longer in some organizations, where you realize actually our whole organization is constrained by this piece of the process here, which currently has 20 people working on it, and we can't afford to recruit up to 30 to relieve that bottleneck. Well, then it starts to give you a really nice lens to say, okay, how could we start thinking carefully about could AI take over some of that cognitive load, free up the capacity of humans to go into other areas of the system, because you always just shift the bottleneck. But as you repeatedly do that and introduce new silicon employees in sensitive ways and bring the employee base and all the leaders within the organization along on that journey, you start to see a really incredible increase in throughput and capacity. You have organizations that are able to achieve new levels of throughput or new levels of outcomes that they've never been able to do. Again, it comes down to that people change. If you don't handle that carefully and people decide to, as it's natural to do, carefully and quietly undermine the change that's going on, then, you're failed from day one, no matter how good your technology solution is.
The whole concept that you guys work on is starting with the leadership to be able to get the leadership on board. But what you're fundamentally changing and wanting to implement is the human change for the people that are actually doing the work. So rather than the top down, even though you're working from the top down, it's actually the bottom up method. It's kind of
Yes.
flipping that on its head, really, and thinking about the human at the heart of it, what that human's capabilities or incapabilities are, right?
Yeah.
Which is,
Yeah.
we've got to address. We're human. There's no such thing as perfect. There's only progress, right? So what can these humans do to help support them, to make them better humans in this world of agentic AI as well?
Yeah, entirely that. It's a great observation, Susan. From our perspective, change is multifaceted. Firstly, it's, for want of a better word, it's a people sport. You have to be in contact with people, and that's across all different layers of the organization. You need that grassroots drive and psychological safety and desire and capability to grow. Equally, you need to make sure that the big investments and the strategic roadmap for the organization is aligned at the top, and everything in between is required to make all of that come together. Yeah, a lot of the time, the majority of the time, we start with the board or the C-suite, because usually when organizations reach out to us, they're kind of toiling under a scenario where they've got failed or kind of disjointed or misaligned proofs of concept, which are great and wonderful, and it's a fantastic place to start, but it hasn't started to group together into real scaled production and operational value of any kind. So we start with the leadership team to really understand, where is your business going? What is your strategy? How do you compete? How do you create value? How do you differentiate yourself? And then from there, we can start to think through whether it's on the internal side, the Silicon Employee Roadmap, and what types of things could add that value, or perhaps it's on the more experiential side, on the growth side of the business, and starting to look more at journey maps and the key touch points and service moments within there. But once you have all of that aligned and you have the business cases in place and you've got the budgets in place to support this, and you've got the understanding and the acceptance of the amounts of change and support that's required for that to happen, you can then involve the wider organization. And that's not to say the wider organization hasn't been involved at all until that point. Of course, you need to spend a lot of time with them to understand where the real challenges are. You need to go to Gemba, in old Toyota parlance, you need to go and understand and feel the challenges. But yeah, you have to tackle that change from multiple different angles all the time. But ultimately, it has to all be aligned with business strategy. Otherwise, it will be cut short, it will be underfunded, it won't get the support that it needs. Yeah, you need to make sure all of those fundamentals across all those layers are in place.
Yeah. I mean, to speak a little to that, we have a project ongoing just now, and there's obviously limitations that we can talk about, but AI strategic project looking sort of national infrastructure. And exactly as you said, a top-down and bottom-up approach. For successful transformations, you kind of need a bit of both. Like you absolutely you need to start at the top down and work there. But if you only do that, it's going to crash and burn. Exactly as Gary said, we spent the last couple of months doing a combination of both of those things. We certainly started with those sort of like workshops with the leadership layer, understanding where their priorities are, where the bottlenecks are, where the challenges, where their current strategies are going. Because, and this is the other thing I think that often gets left out when transformations, or AI or otherwise, starts. You never start at point zero in a transformation. Though a business isn't standing there waiting for someone to come up with the next thing for it to do. It has multiple incentives, which people have their career tied to and things as well. So you have to understand all those things. And that's very much the top-down approach of starting up there and working your way down. The bottom up's equally true in this case. As Gary said, the go to Gemba, a fantastic principle to make decisions about the work that you have to go to the place where the work is done. Not too sure how he swindled this actually. I ended up driving around a lot of their national infrastructure depots around the country while Gary was in their nice head office, and as a helps. But we did exactly that. Like you have to go to Gemba. You spent a lot of time talking with the different people who are like hands on in the time to understand what does their day to day look like, what does that environment look like, and that's important for two reasons. We came away with something like 200 plus odd use cases for artificial intelligence on a fairly tactical level, which was great for context. That really helped. The other thing it helps when we talk about that people side of transformation, that actually going and building relationships with them, it builds buy-in, it builds the communication with those things as well. And it's that kind of combination of the both of them, while obviously it takes a huge amount of effort. It's ultimately what sets it up for success as well.
This is why I see that people that are in strategy-based roles and technical roles, so I'm thinking of IT departments specifically here, that's the departments I'm familiar with, they don't tend to speak to the user, usually, only through an IT support desk where they have a ticketing system that somebody comes through and goes, I've got this problem. This person doesn't really know, and sends them a KB guide to be able to sort it out. But by actually going and speaking to that person, what that does is bridge culture, community, and it also helps comms, communication at the heart of it, right? Because that's how we work, is through communication, right? Human to human interaction, not just the physical aspect of vocalizing it, but the whole concept of how all these things in the context of how they're working and what they're doing their job. So how do you adopt AI without losing culture or clarity? What are some things that you're thinking about with the clients that you're working with, or any ideas that you can help and share with people?
Well, I take the pressure off and go first this time, Kev, rather than throwing it at so I think one of the first things that I'd say, given our both experience in lots of organizations, and the thinking for me goes way, way, way back, is any organizational change of any kind is highly complex. And when I say it's highly complex, what I mean by that is if we distinguish slightly between complicated and complex. Something that's complicated can be very difficult. You perhaps need to be exceptionally skilled to do it. For example, maybe stripping a Ferrari right down to its constituent parts and rebuilding it, you would have to have a huge amount of skill and talent and experience to be able to do that. However, in that complicated world, it is entirely predictable. If you repeat the exact same behaviors time and time again, you will get the exact same result. In a complex world, that's more around a world where there are unknown unknowns. You could do the exact same thing today as you did yesterday, but get a completely different result because there are so many different moving parts, unanticipated things, unknown things, that actually there's no really clear, valuable way to do it. You know, if I phone Kev up, and quite often we'll be out walking in the morning, he's walking his dog somewhere in Glasgow and I'm walking somewhere else in the country, and we'll be chatting along. I don't know if I'm going to get Kevin the consultant. Am I going to get Kevin the father because Daisy's unwell? Am I going to get Kevin the husband because he's just had a disagreement with Kerry? All of these different things are going to change his behavior. And I can't anticipate that. And when you take that and you multiply that by thousands of people in an organization, or potentially tens of different locations across the globe with lots of different regulations and cultures and all these different things, suddenly that change becomes exceptionally complex, not complicated. So how you manage change or how you manage anything in a world of complexity versus a world of complication is completely different. So one of the things that we speak a lot about, and it's inspired very much by Professor Dave Snowden, his incredible work with Kinefin, is how in a complex environment, if we understand what a North Star is and we understand where we are today, then how do you probe, sense, and respond your way to somewhere in the region of where it is that you want to go? So you're not trying to build a great big long plan like you maybe could with stripping down and rebuilding a Ferrari. All you're saying is, look, what are the options that we have today? Okay, I'm going to try that option. I'm going to run a tiny little experiment. And that's your probe. And that could be as simple as dropping into the conversation, hey, Kev, did you sleep well last night? Or it could be something as simple as that, all the way through to being something more complex, like a lightweight prototype or something. And simply by pushing that probe out there and sensing what is the response, did I like that response? Okay, I'll amplify and I'll do a little bit more of that. Or did I not like that response? It was the wrong direction. Okay, we'll dampen that. We'll do a little bit less of that. But by using that iterative and progressive approach, probing, sensing, and responding, you actually gain so much more and you move so much quicker than you ever would building a big, long plan and hoping that everything is going to go exactly as you planned it, because it never, ever will when you're dealing with humans and complex adaptive systems like organizations.
I agree with everything guys said. There's an additional point I would add in there that I think is completely tangential to this, but kind of poked it a little bit. You're asking about the cultural change, especially with AI. I personally have found over the last few years that there's an interesting cultural clash a little bit with AI. A lot more of traditional businesses are set up around accountability, and I don't necessarily mean in the good sense of accountability. A lot of departments, processes, and cultures, because that's a huge part of the culture, is who's the person I can yell at if they get this wrong? Who's the person that can be fired if this goes wrong? Artificial intelligence can challenge that to a degree, because if the AI gets it wrong, which they can do, and there's obviously ways you can refine that, which I'm sure we can get into, you don't necessarily have someone to fire at the end of it. And that, for those sort of cultures that are very stuck in those traditional hierarchical, almost authoritarian cultures, that presents a real barrier to it, because that is ultimately how they ensure quality of do it or you're fired. So there's an interesting cultural shift that I think that will start to create in some industries of when that person can't be fired at the end of it. How do you start measuring success and holding things accountable within your culture and organization?
I think becomes really interesting because you then start getting into ideas of identity. In that case, where there's nobody to fire, the only person you can really turn your reflection on is yourself. Did I give a good enough instruction to the agent? That starts to challenge that individual's identity. But I think AI seems to be really quite polarizing in many areas around identity. I think one of the ones that we've seen over the last month or so, albeit it's been boiling for a couple of years now, is the whole idea of vibe coding. You've now got people like Linus Torvald, for example, who's now vibe coding different solutions. You've got some really prominent people in the development world saying, I just can't keep pace with the quality of code that these things are generating. And that really has been largely since Claude Code came out in December, because prior to that, yes, it was incredible. It was producing some great stuff, but I think a lot of developers, from a personal identity perspective, would probably rightly argue, no, I'm fine. I can do better. It can't replace me. We really are at an inflection point there. Now, we really are starting to see these things produce exceptionally high quality solutions. That changes things. That becomes very, very challenging for people. You have to be really sensitive to that and that cultural shift. If you don't find ways to help people understand where they're going and offer that opportunity for psychological safety and enablement, migration into other areas of reward and excitement and passion, then you're gonna hit big challenges.
What I'm hearing is that it's almost about skills and the individual skills that human have, but also what are the skill sets across the business that are maybe not being utilized effectively.
Yeah.
Because when we're implementing any sort of new tool, we know that it's replacing some process that's usually there, but we then need to use some of our other skills usually, whether that be communication or collaboration or teamwork, or actually learning some technical aspects to then be able to use that tool. And how do they work together? So again, I'm thinking of developers that you mentioned there as well. So if developers, now I'm all for that the developer role, I think, is going to go out the window. I know it's a little bit of a contentious statement there, but we know that the AI tools are learning a lot quicker than what they're not learning is how to innovate in context and how to do it with what's happening around that culture in that business and how people and human are interacting with it. And that's what people that work in tech, people that work with technical roles can really think about. What are my human skills that I can start to adapt? How can I collaborate with another team to go, let's think about a new innovative solution of how we're working together? Or how does this process work differently? Because it's actually how we're humans, but the technical teams don't tend to have those skills of communication effectively, understanding, empathy, because they're so technically mindset driven, step-by-step process. They can't articulate it in the same way. I hope that question isn't really a question there, but the statement really is coming across around the skills development really is part of it. Right?
As a designer, I am all for bashing developers. I think that go harder. Dreadful people.
As a reformed technologist, I'll probably safely tread a slightly more careful line. However, I think the economics of software development now, and I'm conscious we are straying from kind of silicon employees into another area now altogether, but the economics of software development have fundamentally changed, especially over the last 6 months and on the lead up to Pod Code in December. So, for example, any organization or any individual, if they wanted to create a piece of software to do something, a lot of the time, and I think consultancies have been a large part of the problem with this in many cases, you're going to probably have to engage in hundreds of thousands, if not into 7 figures worth of development costs to create a piece of software which has got, all these nines behind it. So the uptime's great, and this is the operational cost and all these different kind of things. But we kind of treated that badly as a one-size-fits-all. This is how you create robust software. These are the things that you must put into place. Whereas what we're starting to see now, and I absolutely love this, is you're starting to see people treating software much more like a shopping list when you go to Tesco. You can spin it up really easily. You can write a few things on it. It can be really productive and help you have a successful shopping trip to the supermarket. And then you scrunch it up and you throw it away because the financial investment and the time investment in creating that thing is negligible. It's neither here nor there. So, there's another designer that we work a lot with over the last while recently was trying to animate some dots as part of an animation on some software that they were working on. Now, a year ago or even 2 years ago, they would have been confined to the capabilities of whatever Adobe package that they were using to try and create that animation. Turns out it wasn't managing to tick the box. So this developer with no technical background whatsoever jumped into some kind of vibe coding solutions and crafted a piece of software that had all these sliders that allowed them to play with the angle of the dots, the volume of the dots, the density of the dots, the color, the speed of the motion, and so on. They played about with it until they got it just right, hit export, and then they threw the piece of software away. And to have that level of flexibility, we don't need to have a one-size-fits-all now. You can really have these exceptionally valuable things that are, very temporary, but they help you achieve incredible stuff in a short period of time. And that's a massive shift in the economics of software.
I think you could even put that on, I was going to say, I'll avoid what I was going to say. I think you could superpower that. Because right now we're seeing that as a human to machine interaction of we make almost that. I think Sam Altman used the term fast fashion of tech recently, and that kind of falls into that category quite nicely. That's almost like human to machine. What happens when that starts to become machine to machine? What happens when an agent is given a task? It creates a piece of bespoke, disposable software to execute it in the moment. Does it, throws it away. That becomes quite fascinating, where it's there's a whole value chain or supply chain of disposable tech interacting with each other to achieve a job.
Yeah. I think very closely related to that is we were speaking with somebody just a couple of weeks ago who was describing that the organisation that they come from and the product that they were working on. It was clear that person, deeply respected, rightfully deeply respected all of the people that they worked with and the talent that was in there. It was kind of fun as a bit of a thought experiment to see, look, how quickly can we recreate this? Now, don't get me wrong, it wasn't a productionized, scalable, we're ready to go to market solution. However, some very quick vibe coding replicated some software that they've had major challenges with developing within half an hour. And you suddenly realize that all these businesses that have invested time and money and effort and love and passion for many, many years, there's no moat there any longer, because anybody with a £20 subscription to some of these tools can recreate that in absolutely no time whatsoever. We haven't really started to feel the economic impact of that in the market yet, but it's coming. You see the early signs of it.
It is. I mean, there's an interesting bit on that, because I think tangentially to this, you have the whole idea of jobs are going to be lost to it. And I recently told a room of developers that's completely true, and anyone that tells you otherwise is basically lying to you, as good as that may feel. Now, that doesn't mean all developer jobs are going, but they are going.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things is, like, anyone who has the misfortune of visiting LinkedIn will see that it's a constant stream of talking about jobs being lost and how awful this is and how horrible this is. And I do have a bit of a pet peeve about this, where in reality, for the last 20 years in tech, we replaced everyone else's job. And I don't remember many of us complaining about it. Like, when you think about, like, all the technology that came out, from self-serve checkouts to online books and all of these things, the technology has been replacing jobs from the start of technology, but digital technology has been replacing jobs at an alarming rate for the last 20, 30 years. Developers, designers, all those people, I don't remember much of a reaction about it. I think what we're really saying now is it's replacing my job and I don't like it. And I think, to be honest, if you are within that camp, you need to look at those other people who had their jobs replaced by the last wave of digitalization and technology. Is like, complaining that you're going to lose your job and not being happy about it is not really the way to go. It's skate where the puck's going to be. It is coming. It is going to cost jobs. You get to respond to that. That's kind
And
of
it's
where
how people respond to that. And I think that's where the change management has to be articulated really carefully from an organisational point of view, but also as an individual. We need to think about what our skill sets are that we can help to enhance for any role, but also job roles specifically are going to change. And what does that look like? I really want to start seeing people doing more creative things outside of their job that they can then think about using their creative brain within the work environment to help to come up with more solutions. I feel, again, just on the topic of future of work, I feel that people forget to be human because we've been associated with technology for 20 plus specifically. So when I was Apple, I started to see this change, and it was insane, the behaviours of people that I've started to see over the last 10 to 15 years gradually. Social media has a huge part of that, but also the behaviours of how people interact with technology as a distraction tool. And actually AI is going to take that away. It's not going to be a distraction anymore. It's going to allow us to be humans again, which is going to be interesting. But from a skill set level and from how we're actually working in jobs, I see it as opportunity. I don't see it as negative. I see it as great. I can try something else. Great. I can do something different. I can think agile. I can do something that maybe is more aligned with what my core values are. The whole career concept is going to go out the window, I think, as well. Not just specific roles, but careers.
I love that, Suze. I think if we can get to that point, I think that's incredible. And that's certainly a place where we'd love to help. With the Lundale, to help businesses get to. I think there are some hidden gotchas which do kind of terrify me. And one I'd call out is speaking with a senior person in a tax business not that long ago. And we were talking about the efficiency and the productivity that you would gain from Silicon employees. And over the course of that conversation, one penny dropped for that person, which is there are times in the week, for example, Friday afternoon, where I'm exhausted. I've spent a lot of time doing some serious client-based work. I use the Friday afternoon to get my admin done so that I can let the steam off and relax a bit into the weekend. And suddenly you realize that admin work that you've actually used as a means for recovery, to space yourself, to give yourself that little bit of a boost at different times, is no longer there. And I think we have to be very careful about stuff like that. It's great to boost productivity. It's great to become more efficient. But we have to recognize, again, for the humans can't be 100% all the time. It can't be pedal to the metal the whole time. So if we're going to become more efficient and more skilled in some of those ways, how do we still allow ourselves to build in the time that humans need to be able to recover and regenerate and prepare themselves for that next difficult conversation? Because we can't just keep doing that in and out. We'll burn out really, really quickly. And I think there's quite a few different things like that where it sounds quite utopian up front, It's not until you get bitten by these challenges further down the line that you realise, actually, there's a whole pile of things that we need to think deeply about here.
But does that mean that we don't do weekend work anymore, and that actually these
Oh.
admins, these tools that are doing administrative work can do them at any time, and that frees us up to be doing other things
That could be amazing.
as well?
Although
The
you
9
see
to
Kevin,
5 changes.
you see Kevin, I shifting uncomfortably because we don't really switch off much.
No. Really quickly on that too. That's kind of an interesting point though, like the 9 to 5. Because you think like 9 to 5 as a model is insanely outdated to the best of my knowledge, and I'm not a historian by any means. That was a working pattern set around daylight times within people and calculated. Was it Henry Ford that came up with the weekend because it was the optimal amount of time to give someone off so they didn't burn out, but you could still drain them economically. As like that does
People
seem
were the
somewhat-
commodity then, right? People,
yeah.
people were.
Yeah, they were. They were like, it's not a popular thing to say, but they definitely were. Whether or not they should be, I'll leave up to someone else. Yeah, if you think about that, that's if we talked about point application system in terms of innovation with artificial intelligence. I think that's easy to do on a company level. When you start looking at artificial intelligence as it matures, as it obviously will continue to do, the system level in terms of our economy and our country and all of the like our nation state and everything, that at some point has to be up for grabs, because the basics of a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, is it really relevant in a artificially intelligent world? Is like, we don't really need to be up, at least for what we do, we don't really need to be up when the sun's up, these different things like that as a whole system needs to start evolving. I'm not really sure there's clearly not an answer to it. I suppose that's where the sort of the real freakiness starts once we start getting into that level of system change.
That has to change from when kids go to school. It has to change because it's really the whole business, I feel, is based around family, right? So it's based around when the kids get dropped off to school, parents go to work, they either leave early to pick up the kids or one of the parents does, and then they've got to finish up to be able to then put the kids to bed. Until education system keeps up with the way that the world, the age is we're moving into, I don't think that's going to happen across businesses as of yet, I think, until we start to see that.
The sort of the laws of unintended consequences are huge there as well. I mean, so many like over the sort of historical shifts of like, women entering the workforce way more over the last several decades. If you take that, where you think, that's a great thing, and families now have 2 incomes, whereas historically there were maybe 1 income, you would think that's a great thing. The law of unintended consequences was house prices rose dramatically because they can pay more now. And we got to a point where actually you are for the majority of us, you're actually forced to be a 2-income household now because of the economics around it. Exactly, that initially great thing had a lot of unintended consequences on an economic level, on a housing level, and all these things. And it's like, it'd be naive to think that a similar impact of those unintended consequences aren't going to come in from artificial intelligence. Personally, I'm kind of fascinated to watch what they're going to be, because by definition, they won't be bad or good. They'll hopefully be a mixture of both.
Do you feel, this is my last question before we finish up with our 3 tips, but do you feel the impact of what's happening in the US and how it's really the top 5 tech companies out there that are really telling the rest of the world how to run? Do you feel that all businesses are kind of modeling what these 2 tech companies are doing, and we're all having to adapt to be able to keep up with what they're doing, or not? Or can we be different? Can Europe be different? Can Asia be different? How do we challenge it?
That's a really fascinating one. There was a great talk quite a few years ago by Paddy Ashdown, where he talks about a vertical shift in power. And I think that vertical shift in power is really interesting, because suddenly power moved to a space that's not really governed. It's above the nation state, but there isn't really any global governance model that's in place. For probably, or certainly as far as I'm aware, for the first time ever, we're in a position where private companies have got GDP greater than many countries. You've got the leading research coming from those private companies rather than academic institutions or from the military. That affords a huge amount of power to people who in many ways are sitting above the existing governance structures that are put in place. they will continue to file into that area until appropriate governance is set out and put in place. And Paddy Ashton's talk on that was incredible. It was really eye-opening. And I think there's a line that he uses in there, and I'm sure I'll get it quite wrong, but it's something along the line of, we've got the dubious privilege of having a front row seat to some of these biggest changes that we could ever live through. So yeah, I think it's massive. It's difficult to see what's happening in the US or other areas of the world not filtering out into other areas. There's massive changes afoot. The world, I think, in 5 years' time from now is going to look completely different to how it is today.
Yeah.
Again, back to complexity, it's a very complex space. I don't think anybody could predict exactly what that looks like. But yeah, there's a lot of change afoot for sure.
Yeah, I've been pestering Gary with a bit of I don't even know what you call it, conspiracy theory or what, that I've been playing with over the last few years. I'm quite a fan of history. And one of the things I think is quite interesting that's been coming up, that angle of tech companies is hyper relevant to, is if you go back to the Middle Ages, or European Middle Ages anyway, you had these sort of, obviously the medieval era wasn't great for sort of thinking and progression. It was kind of a stagnated era with a lot of violence. But if you think about it, there was sort of fracturing authorities, and often competing authorities, between your feudal lord of king or duke or whatever it happened to be, but then potentially the church and the religion, and those two would fight like cats and dogs sometimes. And then depending what your job was, there might have been a guild involved. And those different authorities would have sometimes complementary, but often very competing clashes with each other. At any point, you could be dragged in any direction by any of them. Over the sort of post this sort of Renaissance and into a bit more of an imperial world, which obviously brought its own challenges, we got this sort of amalgamation of the church and the state and the guild, and you got this almost single state or single authority within a state represented in the nation state, which kind of our governments for the most part. And that's kind of the world we've been used to for the last several centuries now, and we all grew up and we're used to. I personally think we're starting to see a devolution of that. We're almost, in some ways, going back to the medieval era, where actually those things don't really go. Politics seem to now be on a global level of sort of left and right wing. You're starting to get things like tech companies are almost comparable to the old guilds, where they actually are completely separate from the countries that they're based in, and they will have at different times competing and sort of conflicting priorities with the nation states that they operate in, and with within, I suppose, not only they operate in, their customers and their users may not be in the same nation states as well. The Meta in the US being used by people in the UK, and that's getting kind of interesting of where that's going to lead, because what happens when a giant corporation who's actually more wealthy and more powerful than a nation state clashes with them? How does that actually play out? And we're starting to see those little clashes coming around. The whole VPNs potentially getting banned in the UK and things like that. That feels like it's just going to be almost weirder than fiction in some ways.
We are definitely in the future, which we don't know, or we can't predict, which again, we have to adapt and be adaptable and be agile in those spaces. I could chat to you both for hours around this stuff, but for the sake of finishing off this episode, and with our topic being around AI entering the workforce and what that future of work is, with the work that you're doing, what are some 3 tips that you can share with our listeners or viewers around AI entering the workforce and what that means for them?
So I knew this question was coming, and I prepared for it. So Gary threw me under the bus a few times the first time, so I'm taking this opportunity to do it to him now. There you go.
I'm less prepared. So I think 3 tips. So I'd say, first of all, start with business, not technology. You need to think about your strategy. You need to think about how you create value. You need to think about how you go to market. Don't just start with throwing technology at a solution. I'd say, secondly, you need to probably reconsider your business assumptions and your moats. To the point that I made earlier, you can recreate something that's taken many, many years and many millions of pounds to build from the ground up. And, with a 20 quid subscription to certain vibe coding platforms or whatever. So you need to, even if you feel like you're an established incumbent and you're right there out in front, you need to really deeply think about, what does the future look like, and are we as safe as we thought we were? And then the final one, and this comes back to the heart of Owendale and how we think about these things, is you need to put people at the heart of change. While to some, billionaires out there, the idea of paying a pittance to many, many agents to run a peopleless organization might sound great. It's not the reality for most. You need to make sure that you retain your top people, that you help them transition effectively and meaningfully. You rethink the boundaries of jobs and processes. Think about your culture. AI is incredible. We're in a business where we think about that all the time, and there's a huge amount of opportunity that comes from it for growth, for efficiency, for productivity, for creativity. But only if you're really careful around how you integrate that human and AI experience.
Love it. Put the human at the heart of AI. It's exactly what I talk about. So I'm so glad that you guys came on today to share what a vast amount of knowledge and information we've talked about today on
I
this
thoroughly
episode.
enjoyed this. Thank you.
And it's good fun. So how you can connect with Owendale Advisory is going to their website at owendaleadvisory.com/services/intelligence-briefing. It will be in the show notes. Go and click and find out a little bit more of what both Kevin and Gary and the team there are doing to help support businesses with their AI and basically tech infrastructure. But again, putting humans at the heart of it and focusing on that is really where the future of work is going to be, I think. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Sooz.
Great. Thanks so much, guys, for coming on, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Look forward to it.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to Digital Dominators. I hope today's episode gave you something practical or at least a bit of a boost to keep things going in this mad digital world. If you're enjoying the podcast, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming up. There's loads more good stuff on the way and some brilliant guests lined up too. And if you fancy going a bit deeper, come and join the Digital Dominators community. It's totally free and it's where I share bonus trainings, podcast extras and tools to help you build confidence with your digital skills. You'll also get access to my social media prompt calendar so you can finally stop staring at that blank screen wondering what to post. Just head to technologycoachingonline.com/digital dominators to get started. Alright, that's it from me just now. Stay curious, keep showing up, and I'll catch you in the next one.